and the spirit of our treaty has been totally violated. American ships are being severely overcharged.
The Panama Canal, a vital lifeline for global trade connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, is facing an unprecedented crisis that has left the world in shock. Even Elon Musk has weighed in, raising alarms about its future. Once under U.S. control, the canal has been managed by Panama since 1999, but recent events have sent ripples through the shipping industry. From soaring fees to escalating conflicts, something extraordinary has unfolded. What happened to this iconic waterway, and why is everyone, including Musk, so concerned? Let's uncover the full story. Donald Trump's urgent warning. On December 22nd, Donald Trump gave the public a preview of his bold plans for when he steps into the White House, and it sparked quite a buzz. Speaking at a rally in Arizona, Trump didn't hold back when it came to his frustrations with Panama. Specifically, he lashed out at the steep tolls Panama charges American ships to pass through the world-famous Panama Canal, calling them unfair and harmful to U.S. interests. His fiery words left many shocked and stirred up a storm of conversation. He argued that these rising fees are creating huge challenges for American businesses trying to transport goods between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. According to Trump, the high costs aren't just a minor inconvenience.
I can't assure you, you're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. But I can say this, we need them for economic security.
They're damaging the U.S. economy. In his eyes, this might even be one of the reasons the country's economic growth hasn't been as strong in recent years. His proposed solution? If Panama doesn't cut these sky-high fees soon, the United States might have to take drastic action, like reclaiming control of the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal isn't just any waterway, it's one of the most critical trade routes in the world. Ships from all over use it to move goods quickly and efficiently, so any changes to its fees could have major ripple effects on global trade. Trump also pointed out that high tolls might be giving countries like China an edge, allowing them to use the canal to their advantage while leaving American companies stuck with the bill. Because of the canal's prime location, Trump claimed that this unfair situation is putting U.S. businesses at a serious disadvantage. As you might expect, Trump's comments didn't sit well with Panama's president, José Raúl Mulino. Mulino wasted no time firing back, firmly stating that Panama is fully in charge of the canal and has no intention of letting the U.S. or anyone else take it over. He made it crystal clear that the canal belongs to Panama, and he wasn't interested in negotiating with Trump or anyone about the matter. The situation quickly turned into a heated back and forth, drawing attention from leaders and experts alike. Even Elon Musk, the tech innovator who's now playing a significant role in U.S. government spending, chimed in with his opinion. According to sources close to him, Musk believes that the high fees might not be part of some grand conspiracy, but instead a symptom of Panama's financial challenges. He pointed out that issues like a dwindling freshwater supply, political instability, and rising security costs have all made it more expensive for Panama to maintain the canal. To make up for these challenges, Musk suggested, Panama may be passing the costs onto American shipping companies. While Musk's perspective seemed logical from a business standpoint, it didn't do much to cool the growing tensions. Trump's supporters largely saw his remarks as another example of him speaking out against what he perceives as unfair treatment of the U.S. Others, however, viewed his statements as more than just tough talk. They saw it as a direct challenge to Panama's sovereignty. Panama's response wasn't just defensive, it was forceful. President Mulino expressed strong disapproval of Trump's remarks, leaving no doubt about his stance. His reaction also hinted at something deeper, a complicated history between the two nations that goes back centuries. To understand the weight of the current controversy, you'd have to go back to 1513, when the Spanish explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa first crossed the Isthmus of Panama and realized its importance as a bridge between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. This long history has shaped the relationship between the U.S. and Panama, with the Panama Canal often at the center of it all. The canal's strategic importance has made it a focal point of global politics and trade for over a century, and now it seems to be at the heart of yet another major controversy. So why is this such a big deal? Well, let's find out. The dream of every explorer. In October 1513, a Spanish explorer named Vasco Núñez de Balboa made a groundbreaking discovery while crossing the Isthmus of Panama. He came across a narrow stretch of land that separated the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Recognizing the potential of this find, Balboa immediately saw the possibility of creating a waterway between the two oceans. Excited by the idea, he shared his discovery with other explorers, imagining that, with the right resources, a canal could be built to connect the two. The idea sparked a wave of enthusiasm, as it could drastically reduce the time it took for ships traveling between Europe and Asia. Navigating the southern tip of South America was incredibly dangerous back then. The seas were rough, and any ships that tried to make the journey faced a high chance of disaster. Those few who did manage to return shared terrifying stories of violent storms, unpredictable waters, and strange creatures they believed were sea monsters. The journey was treacherous, and the idea of a shortcut was more appealing than ever. Many explorers jumped on board with the dream of a canal, but despite the excitement, progress was slow. The main issue was simple. The technology of the time just wasn't advanced enough. The tools and equipment needed to build such a massive waterway didn't exist, and the land itself presented its own set of challenges. Thick jungles, towering mountains, and an unforgiving tropical climate made the task even harder. Most of the explorers who tried to work there weren't prepared for such harsh conditions, and it quickly became clear that building a canal was not going to be as easy as it had seemed at first. For centuries, the idea of a canal remained nothing more than a dream. It wasn't until the late 19th century, more than 300 years after Balboa's discovery, that anyone seriously tried to make it a reality. In 1881, a group of French engineers decided to tackle the challenge. By this time, technology had progressed enough to make the task appear possible. The French had just completed the Suez Canal in Egypt, a massive engineering success, and now they turned their sights on Panama, believing they could create a similar sea-level canal there. Armed with the right tools and knowledge, they still had to deal with the same rough terrain that had thwarted explorers before them. The project was handed over to a French engineer named Ferdinand de Lesseps, who had recently overseen the successful completion of the Suez Canal. Given his success, everyone assumed that building a canal in Panama would be just as easy. But from the very beginning, things went wrong. Almost immediately, workers began falling ill with deadly diseases like malaria and yellow fever. The tropical environment was brutal, and the diseases spread quickly, causing widespread death among the workers. Within just a few weeks, many were dying, and it became clear that Ferdinand and his team had seriously underestimated the challenges they were about to face. The first major problem was the climate. Panama's tropical weather brought heavy rains, landslides, and swarms of mosquitoes. These mosquitoes in particular were a huge problem, as they carried the diseases that killed so many workers. Unlike the desert conditions of Egypt, Panama's dense jungle was difficult to navigate. The landscape was filled with uneven slopes and thick vegetation, making it far more challenging to dig through than the flat desert terrain they had dealt with in Egypt. Then there were the costs. All the issues, the diseases, the difficult terrain, and the equipment needed to deal with them made the project far more expensive than anyone had expected. As a result, expenses kept soaring, while progress remained painfully slow. To make matters worse, there was widespread corruption among the higher-ups, which only added to the chaos. By 1889, just 8 years into the project, it had completely fallen apart. Over 20,000 workers had died from disease, and all the money that had been spent was gone. The whole project had become a disaster, with no real progress to show for it. By the end of December 1889, the canal project was officially abandoned. It was a colossal failure in every way. But less than 20 years later, the United States decided to give it another shot. This time, the project was led by John Stevens, a well-known civil engineer with a reputation for getting things done. Would Stevens succeed where so many others had failed? Or would he just become another name in the long list of people who tried and fell short? Let's take a closer look. Construction of the canal. At the beginning of the 20th century, President Theodore Roosevelt became deeply interested in completing the Panama Canal. He saw incredible potential in creating a shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, not only for trade, but also for military purposes. A canal would provide a faster route to transport goods and troops, which would be a huge advantage both commercially and militarily. However, there was a major obstacle. The land where the canal would be built wasn't part of the United States. While constructing the canal itself was one thing, gaining control over the area was another. For Roosevelt's vision to succeed, the U.S. needed to secure legal rights to the canal zone, something previous nations had failed to do. The idea of the U.S. owning, or at least having special rights over the canal, was crucial to making it truly valuable. At the same time, Panama was struggling for independence from Colombia, and the U.S. saw this as an opportunity to intervene. Panama's fight wasn't going well, so Roosevelt figured that supporting their cause could work out well for both sides. In 1903, the U.S. gave Panama political and financial support, and in exchange, Panama agreed to sign a treaty granting the U.S. control over the canal zone. This allowed the U.S. to go ahead with building and managing the canal. The treaty was signed in 1903, and by 1904, construction was underway. But this time, the United States was in charge, not the French, and they brought in John Stevens, a skilled civil engineer with a reputation for getting things done. Stevens was known for his no-nonsense approach and his ability to manage large projects under pressure. He was exactly the kind of person needed to keep the canal project moving forward after so many years of failure. Stevens, now in charge of the canal project, learned from the mistakes of the past, especially those made by the French team led by Ferdinand de Lesseps. Instead of rushing straight into digging, Stevens took a smarter approach. He focused on taking care of his workers, knowing that their health was key to the project's success. He made sure they had decent housing, proper sanitation, and, most importantly, access to medical care. The French workforce had been devastated by malaria and yellow fever, so Stevens made sure to bring in expert doctors from the U.S. military to manage the health risks and prevent the spread of disease. But Stevens wasn't just concerned with the health of his workers. He also realized that digging a sea-level canal, as the French had tried, would be a huge and expensive task, especially given the difficult terrain. The land was full of steep slopes and deep valleys, and leveling it out would take a lot of time and money. So Stevens and his team of engineers came up with a better plan. Instead of trying to dig through the land, they would build a system of locks. This would lift ships to a higher level at one point of the canal and then lower them back down at another point, bypassing the need to dig through the steep hills. This lock system would allow the project to work with the land's natural features, saving money and making the process more efficient. It wouldn't be easy, but it was a more practical solution than what had been tried before. By 1906, the team had made solid progress. But there was still a long way to go, and soon new challenges arose. Tensions between Stevens and the U.S. government, especially President Roosevelt, started to grow. At first, the administration had been fully supportive, providing the resources and backing needed to get the project started. But by the end of the year, the support seemed to be turning into interference. Some reports suggested that Roosevelt was pressuring Stevens to hire a contractor he didn't trust, while others claimed the president disagreed with some of Stevens's decisions about how the project should be run. Whatever the cause, it was clear that the relationship between Stevens and the government was becoming strained. Then things came to a head. Stevens, already under tremendous stress from the pressure of the project and the harsh working conditions, fell ill. It was the perfect excuse for the U.S. government to replace him. But Stevens didn't wait for them to push him out. He resigned publicly in 1907, stepping down as chief engineer and handing over control of the project to a man named George Washington Goethals. What was the progress level under Goethals? Let's find out. Advancements during Goethals' leadership. When George Washington Goethals took charge of the Panama Canal project, many people thought he would introduce new ideas and take the project in an entirely different direction. However, he ended up continuing much of the work his predecessor, John Stevens, had started. Goethals and his team stuck with the same methods that Stevens had used, including steam shovels and dynamite, to dig out the notoriously difficult Culebra Cut, one of the most challenging sections of the canal. It was no easy task. The land was rough and dangerous, requiring new techniques to make real progress. Even with the latest technology, they still faced constant problems, including broken equipment and the immense challenge of moving such vast amounts of earth. Despite all their efforts to prevent disease, such as bringing in top medical teams to combat yellow fever, health conditions were still dire. Nearly 5,000 workers lost their lives to yellow fever and malaria during the project. The work was incredibly tough, and the conditions were far from ideal. On top of the disease, landslides and bad weather constantly delayed their progress. Workers would spend weeks digging through tough ground, only for a single rainstorm to flood the area with mud, erasing all their hard work. It was disheartening, but Goethals and his team didn't give up. They remained determined, knowing they were working toward making the 500-year-old dream of a canal connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans a reality. After 10 long years of struggles, delays, and unimaginable hardships, the Panama Canal was finally completed. On August 15, 1914, the SS Ancon, a U.S. cargo ship, became the first vessel to officially pass through the canal. This was a monumental achievement, not only for the United States, but also for Panama. The canal was set to revolutionize global trade. Before it, traveling between the Atlantic and Pacific took about 2 months, a major hassle for both trade and military operations. With the canal in place, it now only took about 8 hours to travel between the two oceans. This change was immense, providing the U.S. with a huge advantage in both commerce and military strategy. What made this feat even more impressive was the diverse workforce. Laborers came from all around the world, including experienced workers from the Caribbean, all joining together to make the canal possible. It was not just an American triumph, it was a global effort. From the moment the Panama Canal opened, it was under U.S. control. The U.S. didn't just manage the canal itself, they also controlled the entire area surrounding it, which gave them a powerful strategic advantage. President Theodore Roosevelt saw the canal as a crucial piece of military infrastructure, especially with rising global tensions and the threat of World War I. The U.S. military quickly realized the canal's significance and used it to ship supplies during the war. Even after the war ended, the U.S. maintained control of the canal zone. The canal remained vital, not only for military purposes, but also for trade. Over time, the U.S. continued to improve the canal's infrastructure, making it capable of accommodating larger ships, such as the giant Seawise Giant, although it never actually passed through. Nevertheless, countries from around the world saw the canal as essential for faster and more efficient shipping between the Atlantic and Pacific. Panama also benefited from the U.S. presence, receiving generous payments for allowing the U.S. to control the area. For decades, the U.S. held sovereignty over the canal and its surroundings. But by the 1960s and 1970s, Panama began to push back against U.S. control. Everything changed when Omar Torrijos became the president. Torrijos wasn't a typical politician. He was deeply passionate about his country and ready to fight for Panama's independence, no matter what it took. He believed Panama should have complete control over its land, which meant ending the Hay-Buno-Varilla Treaty that had given the U.S. ownership of the canal zone in exchange for financial compensation. Torrijos wasn't about to let Panama remain under U.S. dominance forever. Torrijos knew the canal was essential for Panama's future, both economically and politically, and he wasn't willing to settle for anything less than full ownership. Beginning in the late 1960s and into the early 1970s, Torrijos engaged in tense negotiations with U.S. President Richard Nixon. These talks were far from easy, as both sides had strong feelings about the canal and its importance. But after years of discussions, they finally reached an agreement in 1977. The Torrijos-Carter treaties were signed, granting Panama more rights over the canal. While the U.S. still had significant influence, this marked a major step toward Panama's control. Over the next 2 decades, Panama's influence over the canal grew. They gained more rights each year, moving closer to their ultimate goal of full ownership. The U.S. presence slowly diminished. Finally, on December 31, 1999, Panama officially took full control of the canal, marking the end of an era. The canal was now Panama's to manage, representing a huge victory for the country. What's your opinion on the shocking event that just happened to the Panama Canal? Let us know your answer in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.